got a message actually from my brother-in-law this morning. He's guest speaking at a church on the island that is actually interviewing him for a position. And so, yeah, you just said that, and it just made me feel so nostalgic. I want to thank PC, that's Pastor Chris. Last week, he taught on Psalm 139, and Chris, this morning already, I had multiple people tell me he did an excellent job. I argued them, and then I did listen to it on the elliptical while I was in Colorado Springs on, I think, Monday morning. And I already had people this morning that pulled me aside and said, hey, I had someone here with me last week. That message was exactly what they needed to hear. So God used you, man, and thank you for that. That's awesome. We've got a few weeks left in our series on the book of Psalms. It is the cry of my heart, right? It's the series, and we've asked you to actually put pen to paper, heart to paper, soul to paper, because we've said we want to be a people that not only read the Psalms, that's important, and not only understand the Psalms, that's important too, and apply them to our lives. We also want to be a people that write our own Psalms. And so several people have come up and been a part of the worship experience of actually reading their psalm for the congregation, because even though they were written by these people all those years ago, they were part, a lot of them, of the Hebrew worship experience. And so we invited you to do that. And so, Chad, we've got a few weeks left to get up here and get your psalm writ, and we want to hear from you. And is this the first Sunday morning worship experience for baby Nova? Is it? Oh, that's so cute. Oh, it's amazing. A clap. Oh, man. Wait till I get ramped up. She's going to scream. That's going to be great. So I was, it's good to see you. I was out last week, like I said, and I was in Colorado Springs. I've been to almost every state. There's a few that I haven't. Colorado, for whatever reason, sports didn't land me there at any point in my college career, or so these volleyball drives. I'd never been there. So I went to Colorado Springs. Lane, the former chairman of my elders at Gateway, he had brought me out there, and he runs the men's ministry at Eastside Church of Christ, and so they got a bunch of other churches together, and they put on a men's conference, and they invited me to come and be the speaker for that. So it was super awesome to reconnect with Lane, and I'd never been to a place like that, in the mountains like that. Oh, it's beautiful. Raise your hands if you've ever been to Colorado, all right? Keep them up if you've been to Colorado Springs, all right? A couple down, okay. Oh, my goodness. I got a few pictures that I want to show you guys. Hook me. Garden of the Gods. Like, that place is unbelievable. The history there. You just driving up, you start seeing these rocks and the formations. And, yeah, that was unbelievable. The time we spent walking around there. Yeah, this is, me and Lane, yeah. So kind of having some tourists. I took a day just to go up and survey all the things. What else do we have there? So we did. We did play the Eisenhower Blue Course. Have you played that, Paul? Designed by Robert Trent Jones to destroy and annihilate people. Great course, beautiful. I hit a great drive, a nice iron shot of the green, and then just from that moment, pray. Because I'd never played in the mountains before, and apparently there's this like mountain effect where every putt runs away. At one point, I got so frustrated. I was on the green of like the 13th hole, and my approach shot was on the fringe, but I had like a 50-foot putt from the fringe. And so I looked at the guys and said, guys, I have no clue what this putt's going to do. I am just going to putt as hard as I can, and hopefully it'll hit the flagstick and go in, right? Because other than that, I had no prayer. So I literally hit that putt as hard as I could, taking every bit of breakout, hits the flagstick, and goes in. It was the luckiest birdie I've ever had, because it would have been in the bunker had I missed. It was a terrible golf shot. Yeah, you don't have to. Even awful golfers get birdies every once in a while. Oh, it was beautiful. The mountains in the back. It was just breathtaking every hole. Yeah. Isn't that cool? Just the crevices and all the places. Oh, my. And do we have any of the... Oh, my goodness. That's Pikes Peak, man. And there was still the snow cap on the mountains. We drove up there on Friday, and it was unbelievable. And I think I have one more that I actually took on... I took this out of Lane's window, driving to the airport right before I left. Got chills seeing that. It's just so unbelievable and so beautiful. The ironic thing, not ironic, I think it's more God's timing, and you'll know it when I read the scripture this morning, is this was the text that I had chosen for this Sunday morning, Psalm 121. I just want to read it through. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep watch over you. He will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and your going, both now and forever. More. May God bless the reading of His Word. Will you bow your heads and pray with me? Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? I've always loved this psalm for years, and I think part of it, there was an old praise chorus. I think it was Brian Dorkison or something like that. It was, I lift my eyes up. I forget what it was. If I sing it, you'll not recognize it, but if Stephen were to come up here and sing it, or one of our praise team members, you probably would. And I remember, being a young adult and singing that song as a part of, worship sets with people, and I just remember thinking, whoa, that is an awesome song. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heavens and the earth. And the song goes on to say, I need you, Lord. I want you. All that kind of stuff. But because of that, because of that psalm, and just because of people that have experienced things like I experienced in Colorado, where you go and you see these 14,000-foot peaks, and man, when the sun hits on the peak in the morning, it looks completely different than when the sun is setting on the other side, and all of the clouds as they move across, and the mountain looks so different depending on the time of the day, or depending on the weather that you have, or depending on how much snow, and it's just so breathtaking. And for all of you who have been to the mountains before, I remember hearing that psalm for years. And what I thought the author was getting at, and a lot of people believe, I happen to believe as well, that it was Hezekiah that was the author of this psalm. For a long time, I believe what the author was saying was this: when I look to the mountains, because they're so majestic, when I look to the mountains, because they're so impressive, when I look to the mountains as they point to the sky, that when I lift my eyes up to the mountains because of how majestic they are, I'm reminded of how majestic God is. For years, that's what I felt like that psalm was about. As a matter of fact, in January, and I know I'm going to double dip on this story, but in January, when garage time, Dale and the crew were meeting upstairs at Wegmans, and he asked a question to all the people that were around the table, like 12 or 13 of us, and he said, hey, where do you feel closest to God? And people are saying, I feel close to God at the beach, or I feel closest to God near a lake or on the water, or when I'm hiking in the woods. Like, multiple people around the table that morning said they feel closest to God when they're on a mountain. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? And by the way, the Hebrew people had a number of fascinating mountain experiences. Some in the land that they were traversing on the way to the Promised Land, and some in the Promised Land once they got there. You think of Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. That's where Moses received the 10 Commandments. And boy, when that happened, it was a show, smoke coming from the mountains. And every time Moses would descend to talk to the people, the glory of the Lord was all over him. And so that mountain became a holy mountain to the people of Israel, where Moses received the law. Mount Ararat was the mountain where the ark rested after 40 days of flooding, and then waters starting after that to subside, and finally it rests on that mountain. And so there's history there. Mount Carmel in 1 Kings chapter 18. Oh, what a fascinating story, right? Ahab is not a good king, and Elijah's the prophet, and Ahab has 450 false prophets of Baal, and then 400 prophets of Asherah. And so all these prophets were leading Israel astray, and Elijah was not down with it. So he said to Ahab one day, he said, I have an idea. And Ahab said, what's your idea? He says, why don't we find out who's God once and for all? It was like this, it's like basically their Super Bowl, right? We're going to find out who's on top. And so Elijah says, here's my idea. We're going to go up on top of Mount Carmel. I'll meet you there. You bring your 450 prophets of Baal. You bring your 450 prophets of Asherah. You meet us up there. And what's going to happen is this. We're going to build altars. So they went up and they did. They built their altar. Elijah built his altar. And then he said, we're going to each cut up a bull. So they cut up a bull and put it inside of the altar. And then Elijah says, don't light the wood, whatever you do, because we're going to have a praying contest. I love how people turn praying into a competition. Unbelievable. But we're going to pray. You can go first, Ahab. You and your prophets go ahead and pray. And you're going to pray to your God. And whatever God answers by fire, we'll know that is the true God. So you can read the story in 1 Kings 18, right? Ahab's like, all right, prophets, go. I got 450 Baal prophets. Like, that's 950 total. We're going to win this, right? And so they start praying, and hours go by, and their God's not answering, and the prophets are starting to get frustrated, so they start cutting themselves, the Bible says, and bleeding over the altar, trying to get their God's attention. And Elijah actually starts poking fun of them and talking smack. Elijah's like, hey, maybe your God's busy. Hey, maybe your God's on vacation. He said, hey, maybe your God's using the bathroom. And so these prophets are getting super frustrated, and finally they're done. And their God does not answer by fire. And then Elijah tells his servants, I want you to not just leave my altar as is. I want you to cover, say, buckets, gallons of water until the whole altar was soaked. And then Elijah raised his hands to the heavens and said, God, answer with fire. And boom. Fire comes down and destroys, the whole altar, consumes everything up. Elijah puts to death the 450 Baal prophets and the 400 Asherah prophets, puts them to death, and it's like one of the greatest wins for God in history took place on top of a mountain. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? See, the only problem is, I believe the author's not saying, look to the mountains to seek God. If anything, he's saying, don't look to the mountains to seek God. What do I mean by that? I'm so glad you asked. The Israelites had a commitment problem, okay? That wasn't their strength. As a matter of fact, if you read the book of 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, and you can read every king that pops up, there's a description, right? And as one king dies and another king takes over, the text begins the same way. This king did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just like that king before them, right? And then it'll go on to describe all the horrible things that they did. Or it'll say, this king did good in the eyes of the Lord, just as their father David had done, and God was super pleased. And then it'll list all of the accolades, all of the things that this accomplished. It's a fascinating study to do. I encourage you to do so. And it becomes absolutely clear, and some of the kings did some really good things. Jehoshaphat, Joash, Azariah, Jotham, they were all good kings. You can add Asa to the list. This is what the text, by the way, says about him in 1 Kings 15. He's one of the good kings. It says this: King Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Thumbs up there, right? As his father David had done. Remember the descriptions we just talked about. He expelled the male shrine prostitutes from the land. They were not cool, right? So they're like, go away. And got rid of all the idols his ancestors had made. He deposed his grandmother, got rid of her, Maacah, from her position as queen mother because she had a repulsive image from the worship of Asherah. Asa cut it down, burned it in the Kidron Valley, although he did not remove the high places. Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord all of his life. He brought into the temple of the Lord the silver and gold and the articles that he and his father had dedicated. So if you're reading that in totality, you're going, that's a Hall of Fame resume, right? You guys know who Charles Barkley is, right? So he's more known now for his voice than he is for his playing ability, because if you were to look at him, you'd think, how could that guy even dribble a basketball anymore, let alone get up and down the court? But he's a Hall of Fame basketball player. As a matter of fact, he's one of the greatest, he's one of the top 50 NBA players of all time. He won in the Michael Jordan era, a league MVP. He got to the finals and led what I think was an under-talented team to the NBA finals. He was a member of 10 all-star teams. He was a 6'4" power forward that would go into the paint and dunk crazy powerful dunks on all kinds of people. That, my friends, is a Hall of Fame resume, right? He's Charles Barkley. He's in the Hall of Fame. You know, there's something missing from Charles Barkley's resume. Does anybody know what is missing from Charles Barkley's? And he's got some great nicknames, by the way. Sir Charles, the round mound of rebound. That's my favorite, maybe, nickname of all time. What is missing from Sir Charles's resume? Anyone? Somebody say that louder. I heard it. A championship. Bro never won a title, right? There's something missing from his resume. King Asa was the same way. He did a lot of great things, getting rid of people that were in the way and causing problems and leading Israel astray, getting rid of people that were leading the Israelites into moral decay and the male shrine prostitutes and bringing all the things back into the temple that should have been. He had a pretty good Hall of Fame resume. There was one thing missing from his resume. He did not remove the high places. He did not remove the high places. So what were the high places then, right? So the high places were these places of worship, elevated places of ground, sometimes man-made at times, but on the hills they would erect these high places and they would put pillars up there or stones and they would bow down and have these worship experiences. And so the nations around them, that was a common form of how they worshiped their gods. And so when the Israelites saw the other nations doing this, they're like, we got to get a piece of that. And sometimes they would go there and worship their God, Yahweh, on these high places. But a lot of times they get sucked into worshiping the same way the nations did around them and sucked into worshiping their gods. And so in Israel at that time, there were high places everywhere. When you couldn't look up to the mountains, you couldn't look up to the hills without seeing high places on every single hilltop that was there. And so God had commanded his kings remove the high places. But they had become so sacred to the people, even in situations where it wasn't idols being worshipped. God was clear, the high places have got to go. Even the good kings, for the most part, even the good kings didn't get rid of the high places. They didn't fully obey God. They held a little bit back. It's one of the reasons why I think Hezekiah wrote this psalm. He was one of the good kings, all right? Josiah was another one that did this. Like, I think there was two in the entire record of the kings of Israel and Judah that went the distance in this regard for God. This is what it says in 2 Kings chapter 18 about Hezekiah. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mom's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father David had done. Here it is. He removed the high places. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? He smashed the sacred stones and cut down the Asherah poles. He broke into pieces the bronze snake Moses had made. For up to that time, the Israelites had been burning incense to it. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. Bro went the distance for God. There's a dude right there. He held nothing back. He went the distance. Even the high places came down. So when the psalmist writes, I lift my eyes up to the hills, where does my help come from? What he's not saying is this. He's not saying, when I look to the mountains, God, I see you. He's saying, even if everyone else looks to the mountains, looks to the high places, I'm not looking there for you. My help does not come from them. It comes from you. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. He's drawing a contrast, but my help comes not from anything on the earth, but from the maker of the heavens and the earth. In other words, why would I look to the mountains when I could look to the one who made them? Why would I look to the mountains when I could look to the one who formed them? Which raises a couple questions for us this morning. And the first is this, as we read through those kings, right, and it becomes clear to us, they did a lot of great things, but man, did not move. What are you holding back from God? What are you holding back from God? And maybe you're committed to Him, and maybe you love Him, and maybe you come here and worship, and you're pretty faithful at church, and by golly you serve, and you're here with our students, whatever it is. But maybe if you're honest, there's something inside your life, there's something that is attached to you that you're not willing to let go of. Something you were holding on to. You love God, yes, but for whatever reason, there's something that you're not willing to go the distance for God. Does this make sense? I met a guy years ago. Emma and I first got married, and I actually did not have a job because I was an illegal immigrant, and I'd filed for a change of status. There's no, INS people here or anything. I'm legit now. I got my green card. So at the time, though, it was awesome because I couldn't work. And so I was just I would sponge off Emily. I would go to the gym for hours. I would come home and play Tiger Woods on the PlayStation, and that was my life. And then got my green card, and it went downhill ever since. But I was lifting at the time in Centerville at Lifetime Fitness, and I remember sitting on the bench, and I was doing curls one day, and there's this guy sitting beside me. And so it's just habit. When you're working out, you talk. It's like a whole community of people. And so we're talking, and I said, hey, I hadn't seen you before. And he said, no. He said, it's been probably a year since I've been to the gym. I said, oh, did you take a year off? Did you have an injury, anything like that? He said, no. He said, the problem was it meant too much to me. I said, what do you mean? He said, I got to the place in my life, and we began to talk where I was lifting because I wanted eyes on me. I was training because I wanted people to say, you look good. I was training because I was so vain that it was feeding that side of me. And I was praying with God one day. This is the question He asked me. Will you get rid of that? Will you walk away from that for me? Will you walk away from that for me? And he said, I couldn't get rid of that gnawing feeling that there was something I wasn't given to God, and so I stopped. And until that part of me died, I made the commitment to not come back. And now I'm back just because it's a good thing to do for your body, and it helps you stay healthy. But that side had to go. He said I was holding back something from God. Never forgot that conversation. What are you holding back from God? What is it for you? Maybe it's your calendar. Maybe you're super territorial about your things. I fill my calendar with things for me, and these are the things I'm going to do. And your calendar is built. Maybe there's some things that you need to pull off of your calendar to make room for God. Maybe there's things you need to pull off of your calendar so you can build relationships with your neighbors. Maybe there's things you need to pull off of your calendar so you can find a way to serve and to plug into the church. Maybe there's some things you need to pull off of the calendar so you're not so busy doing that you're not actually being who God called you to be. Maybe your calendar is the issue. What are you holding back from God? Maybe for you it's your, menu. Maybe for you it's your appetite for, maybe just it's eat everything in sight, or maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's your appetite for social media. Maybe it's your appetite for consuming the digital media that's reshaping in the videos that you watch. What is it that you're man, I spend 10 minutes in the Word of God every morning, 10 minutes, and I spend 3 hours every day consuming Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and all the other social medias, and the things are way out of balance. What are you not holding back from God? This is a weird one. Maybe it's your kids. Sounds like an odd thing to say, but man, in the world that we live in, parents, from my vantage point, live for their kids in a lot of ways. What their kid wants becomes more important than anything that needs to happen, should happen, that God wants to happen even in their own home. We'll do anything, we'll drop anything, we'll go anywhere, we'll pay any price, we'll put ourselves crazily in debt for our kids. For our kids. Maybe our own kids are what we're holding back from God. Maybe it's your wallet. Maybe it's your wallet. Maybe God has been stretching you and challenging you to give and to invest in His church and the kingdom and in whatever it is that's going to get the gospel into the world around us. But you're looking at maybe bills coming in, or hey, we're going to save up for this thing over here, or here, man, I'm sorry, I have to shop at that clothing store because it's the only place to get the cool clothes. And I don't know, maybe you've not ever made the commitment to just give. And I'm not saying you don't love God, and I'm not saying you aren't His kid, and I'm not saying He doesn't desperately love you. He does. All of those things can be true, and at the same time, we can be holding back pieces of ourselves, parts of ourselves from God. Like Asa. Did a lot of wonderful things, but I didn't remove the high places. What are your high places? It's another way to ask that question. The second question is this. Not only what are you holding back from God, where do you look for help? Where do you look for help? Is it God or is it like God plus? Is it God or is it God plus? The interesting thing about the high places for the Israelites, they would tell you, a lot of them, we're worshiping God. But they wanted a little side action as well. They would tell you, yeah, we worship Yahweh, we worship the one true God, but they wanted a little bit of security. Because what if God wasn't coming through with what they wanted? What if God wasn't giving them what they had asked for? What if God was saying no or felt silent or distant from them? And so they would find a way to add something else to their spiritual experience so that, man, just in case. Do you have a backup plan for if God doesn't get you where you think you want to go? What is that backup plan? I'm curious to know. Where do you run for help? Living in America, by the way, we know this, right? We preach self-reliance. It's kind of one of the core values of this country. It's why most of us from the time we were kids heard that expression. I'll start it, somebody finish it. God helps those who... You all know it, right? God helps those who help themselves. And we've heard that probably so many times. There's probably people in here that are like, yeah, which book in the Bible is that from? It does sound wonderful. God helps those who help themselves. By golly, if you put in a bunch of work, God will do the rest for you. Man, if you show just enough faithfulness, God then will come through, and He'll be faithful on His end. We can make it sound real spiritual. God helps those who help themselves. Do you know where that comes from, that expression? Anybody? It's one of Aesop's fables, Greek mythology, literally. This is the story about a wagoner and Hercules. A wagoner was once driving a heavy load along a very muddy way. He came to a part of the road where the wheels sank halfway into the mire, into the mud. And the more the horses pulled, the deeper sank the wheels. So the wagoner threw down his whip and knelt down and prayed to Hercules the strong, saying, "Oh, Hercules, help me in this hour of distress." But Hercules appeared to him and said, "Man, don't sprawl there. Get up and put your shoulder to the wheel. The gods help them that help themselves." Proverbs 28:26 says, "He who trusts in himself is a fool." I'll read that again. He who trusts in himself is a fool. And just in case, the human you rely on is someone other than yourself, and that's where you get your source of energy, and that's where you get your source of confidence, and that's where you get your source of strength, and that's where you go for help. It says this, Jeremiah 17:5, "Cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans, and in so doing turn their hearts away from the Lord." Cursed are those. When you run anywhere or to anyone for help, but God, not that God doesn't use people in your life, not that at times God will put someone in your life that you do run to, but if your source of inspiration and your source of hope and your source of joy and your source of peace and all of those things come from anything but God, you're inviting a curse on your own life. A curse. Where does your help come from? The psalmist is clear. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Boom, high place. Boom, high place. Boom, high place. Look at, where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, maker of those mountains. Alex Haley, the author of Roots, had an unusual picture hanging in his office on the wall. It's a picture of a turtle on top of a fence post. When asked, "Why is that there?" Haley answered, Every time I write something significant, every time I read my words and think, man, that sounded good, they're wonderful. And every time I begin to feel proud of myself, look at what I've done. I look at the turtle on top of the fence post and I remember that he did not obviously get there on his own. He only gets there if he has help. Who is your help? Who is your help? I love this psalm. The psalmist finishes with 6 verses that basically say the same thing. You listen to these verses and how many times, pay attention, you hear the word watches, right? And this parallelism is just rampant, basically saying the same thing. Here it goes. Saying that God is the one who can be trusted to save, that God should be a source of help. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day. The moon won't harm you by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and every day you suck breath on earth and beyond. And you have a beautiful picture of a protector that is ever present, and not just ever present, but ever aware, and not just ever aware, but ever invested in the well-being of you, the person he's watching. That's beautiful language, and it paints a beautiful picture, and for me, the picture that comes to mind is that of a loving parent. Smiling at Nora. Because for every parent in this room that stayed up all hours of the night because a kid has the flu and they're puking and crying and puking and crying and puking and crying, and the only thing they don't want to be with, parents, you've been there, is alone. For every parent that's been there, you know, for every parent that's been up all night praying for their kid because their kid is struggling and they don't have the answers. And you, as a parent, you feel impotent and I don't know what to do, God, but I just see them hurting and nothing seems to satisfy them. And you pray and you pray and you pray. For every parent that's been in bed all night long just holding and crying and next to a broken-hearted child. You know exactly what God is saying and how God feels about you. I think I may have told this story a while back. I don't care. But it's one of the stories that when I read this portion of the psalm sticks out in my mind, and it's that picture that I carry with me for the rest of my life. Okay, that's God and me. That's God and me. So when my aunt Blaze, on my mom's side, one of her brothers was getting married to Monica, we were invited to the wedding. Obviously, we're family. It was in Nova Scotia, so my parents load us up, and we go there, and we check into a hotel. And the wedding was in a church, and they were Roman Catholics, so we go to the wedding, and the reception was at a fire hall. One of my uncles was a volunteer firefighter, so it made sense. And so there's going to be a big old wedding, friends, family, all of that kind of stuff. And we, as a family, instead of buying, because everybody has the registry and they buy all these things to fill a house, all that kind of stuff. So rather than do that, because they didn't really need any of those things, all the family, all the friends got together and they lumped all the money in and they bought, I think it was a 1982 brand new Pontiac Firebird, red. Beautiful car. And so they had a car as a couple to drive off into the sunset, right? So that was the wedding gift. And my uncle Gerard, who's Blaze's brother, was an alcoholic. And so he'd start drinking in the morning, and he would drink all the way to the end of the night when it was time for bed. He just drank himself silly. And when he wasn't drinking or had just a little bit in him, he was the sweetest, kindest, most loving. He was the uncle you wanted to crawl up on his lap. His natural disposition was welcoming and loving and caring. And I have some memories of that uncle where I'm like, man, he had a collection of hats that wwere on the wall. And because of that, I loved collecting hats for years. I collect ball caps and then I would come and say, hey, which ball cap do you want? And I would take one of those ball caps home. And I remember, I have a lot of good memories of Uncle Gerard. And then there's a not so great memory on the night of the wedding, because they were unsure of how much alcohol he would consume. Blaze and Monica, under the advisement of my grandmother, made the decision to not have Gerard in the wedding party because they didn't want a scene and not have him therefore sit at the head table at the wedding. Which they did it to avoid a mess. It ended up bringing on a mess. And so as the reception started, Gerard headed out of the reception, drunk as a skunk, and set fire to and burned down the 1982 red sports car. And so word was that he was going to come after my grandmother because he was upset. It was her decision. And so my father and my mother grabbed Grandma. This is how you leave a wedding, right? You Canadian weddings, man, you want to show. We'll show you something. We leave the wedding reception, and we take her in our car, and we go to the hotel where we're staying, probably like a little old Roach Motel. And I just remember the whole night, this is the vision I have of that night. From the moment we got there till the sun came up was my father standing between the window and the door, behind the door, peeking outside, holding a baseball bat so that we could sleep and we could be safe. I'll never forget that image of my father. Any threat, you had to go through him. If you were going to come after the people that he loved, you were going to have to go through him. And I'll never forget the image of my Father, the protector. He who watches over you, friends, watches over you, will never slumber or sleep. He doesn't take any days off. He doesn't take any hours off. He doesn't take any minutes off. He doesn't take any seconds off. And I don't know what it is in your life that is threatening you and what is eating at you or what is coming at you, but you have a Father who is desperately protective about you. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of the heavens and the earth. Will you bow your heads and pray? Father in heaven, I thank you for the truth in this text, Father. I thank you for speaking to me this beautiful truth while I was away. At the invitation of my brother Lane, I miss him terribly. Father, I thank you that there is not a second that goes by where your eye's not on your people. We are your kids. We're the sheep of your pasture. You designed us. You put your Holy Spirit in us. You created us in your image. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. You didn't just plunk us on earth and say, have at it, boys and girls. Good luck. No, you are fully invested in me, fully invested in everyone in this room, Father. And the world could throw 1,000 things at me and say, trust them, run to them for help, go to that thing for help. Father, no, my help comes from you. And Father, my confession and my prayer is this: whatever is in my life, that I am deriving my sense of success or my sense of worth or my sense of meaning or my sense of significance, whatever is in my life, and those are, I'm trying to draw from that well. Father, shut that well down so that the well I draw from is you. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Oh, no, no, no. It's not where my help comes from. My help comes from you. In Jesus' name.